Age of Mythology is a PC RTS game, that's a real-time strategy game if you didn't know, developed by Ensemble Studios and published by Microsoft, released to the world in October 2002. I was personally introduced to it by a friend who I'd later borrow it off of until I eventually managed to find my own copy. There was a later expansion, The Titans, in 2003, a remaster on Steam in 2014, and most surprisingly of all, especially to me actually, back in 2016 we actually got a new expansion. It was rated pretty well at the time of its original release, easily in the high 80s to low 90s in terms of review scores, and I loved this game as a kid. So I figured I'd go back as an adult, since it made sense to review it and see what I think of it now. But what's the game about? Well, it's about leading your little town of dudes, as you can see a few of them here, and building up your army to go and defeat your foe, or at least that's the idea on skirmish mode. The campaigns, of which there are several, and I'll go over those later, often have their own separate objectives, from building and manning the actual literal Trojan horse, to recovering the scattered pieces of Osiris to literally put it back together again. Yes, you can probably tell by the name of the game is very much based on the various myths and legends of ancient cultures. The gods themselves watch over you, and by worshipping you can even borrow their powers. For example, this one. These god powers are probably what separates this game the most from any other, well, RTS game both of the time, and even really nowadays to some degree. They're mostly single use, such as the Great Hunt power I did earlier that multiplied the animals available to hunt. So you'll have to time them well, and their effects can vary quite significantly. To show off a few, we'll use one of the cheat codes. They can range from the mostly offensive powers, such as a few of the ones here. For example, just summoning up an actual tornado, to an earthquake, which is unkind to buildings and just about everything else really. But there are also some more support abilities, such as, for example, summoning up a northern gold mine, or an eclipse that increases the attack of myth units. There's a lot here, and making good timing of them can be, well, key to victory effectively. However, there's a little bit of nuance to using these as well. God powers, for the most part, as I'll demonstrate here, cannot be used while another power is active or within the range of another power. So the Eclipse power that's active at the moment is literally stopping me from using anything. And you also have to have line of sight to be able to use these powers. Admittedly, if you're like me and you're playing with Odin as your main god, so you get his little ravens as a free pet, it is a little easier than others, but it's something to keep in mind. Additionally, there's other things that can block you from using god powers. So, for example, certain mythological buildings. And if you're playing as the right sub-faction, especially the one that comes to mind is, I believe, Isis, I think is the one. The Egyptian monuments can actually stop you from using god powers in your range, forcing you to destroy them first. In fact, the AI has just dropped a lightning bolt on somebody over there. Speaking of the factions, the devs took inspiration from 3 different mythologies in the base games, with 1 more coming for each of the 2 expansions, for a total of 5. The Greek faction gave you the gods Zeus, Hades and Poseidon, all their various god powers, mythological units and faction bonuses. The Egyptians had Ra, Isis and Set, and the Norse had Thor, Odin and Loki, with the later Titans expansion giving you Kronos, Uranus and Gaia, and the Chinese expansion giving the 3 that I'm about to butcher the pronunciation of, Fuxi, Nuwa and Shenong, which is probably completely wrong. The factions actually do play notably different to each other. There's a good bit of variation here, and if you're wondering what I used to play, Egyptians. The Greeks are the faction that you originally start with on the campaign, and are kind of the most all-round. They're good all-round, like I said, they are good all-rounders with fairly easily understood units. Most of them have a fairly simple singular role. Their powers vary a bit, but they can range from things to, like Zeus's lightning bolts, to, as I'm playing as Hades, his Slave Sentinels, which will protect your town centre, and he starts with a citadel, because all the gods also have their own small faction bonuses. To gain the favour of the gods, which is needed for certain units and upgrades, the Greeks have to, well, You basically have to give up the villagers free time to go pray at a temple. Favor being this resource here. The main resources to the game overall being food, usually used for training units, especially for big myth units. Wood, that's often used for buildings. Gold, which is often pay for workers, although you only pay once when you build them. Population, which is how many units you can have, which can be increased by building things like houses. And favor, which again is used for mythological units. Three main gods for the Greeks are, as mentioned, Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades, and I'll go over their factions in just 1 second. So, the Greek gods. Zeus has a focus on infantry, as it states in the bottom, gaining more favour, and has a reasonable spread of god powers. His signature bolt is basically an instant kill on a single unit. Restoration is a healing power that can heal your units, while Ceasefire just prevents anyone fighting for a bit. Underworld Passage makes basically a teleport gate that can be destroyed, but it's pretty resilient, while Bronze temporarily turns your infantry into living metal. And then at the end of it is both Lightning Storm, a very powerful anti-unit Lightning Storm, but weak against buildings, and Plenty, which it creates an infinitely generating stream of resources. It's very useful. Hades, meanwhile, has a chance for his soldiers to get back up again, and is focused on archers and buildings. And as mentioned, starts with Citadel. Actually, no, I tell a lie. Doesn't start with Citadel. That's part of the map type. I should clarify that here. As you can probably see, most of the factions share god powers to some extent, but they tend to be a little bit different. He starts with the Sentinels you saw earlier. At the second tier, you can take the Healing Restoration again, or you can take a different one, Pestilence, which shuts down certain buildings. He also gets Curse as another option in the second age, which can turn things into pigs. And at the far end also gets Earthquake, which is a building destroying power, which I think I've also shown off already. While Poseidon is supposedly a cavalry focus, but also gets a few sea units that are unique. And his buildings turn into units when destroyed. Power-wise, he gets the Lure, which draws in animals, but the rest are all not unique. You've seen these before. Next up, we come to my favourite faction from the game, the Egyptian faction. This is actually their Citadel model. I made a mistake earlier with the Greeks, but no, this is actually meant to be the Egyptian town centre Citadel building. Unlike the Greeks, the Egyptians don't use wood for their buildings. They only, I believe, use gold for most of their buildings. Oh, I tell a lie, they use food for some of their monuments.
Tayo.
Tayo.
I need to cut this out. They have a unique priest unit. This fellow here. A cheap hero that can both empower buildings to improve their effects, which your pharaoh can also do. He can both improve the effects of buildings and make them go faster. And also can build these cheap obelisks, which cost very little and provide a good line of sight. He's the only unit in the game that can build those. Additionally, if you're worshipping the right god, these priests can even summon possessed animals, such as the wild animals that you find lying around and can hunt for food, or can even hunt you, in case of some of the bigger creatures. The Pharaoh unit is also unique to Egypt, and again, as mentioned, he can empower your buildings to build faster, create units faster, for example. See the rate that's going up once he starts to empower it. Not an enormous difference, but it can make the difference. He's also got a little bit of combat skill, but you can't recruit more than one of him. You get a free one if he dies after a short time, but that's it. Their favour comes from building monuments. Apparently I can't afford them at the moment, but the way monuments work is that you build one. In fact, I will rely on the cheat codes once more. I'll go a bit more into those later, but the game has quite a lot of cheat codes, and they're actually quite enjoyable. I don't use them these days much, but they're quite good for this. But yes, the Egyptian monuments will provide a trickle of favour once completed, and each time you finish one, you gain access to build the next largest one. I think there's about 5 or 6. The more you have, the faster that trickle comes in, and depending on what your god is, as mentioned earlier, they will actually repel god powers. They won't let you use god powers in the area. And the Pharaoh himself could also bless one of these to make the favour come in even faster. Gods of Egypt, in fact the faction as a whole, gets its own unique set of god powers and abilities, of course. First of all, is Ra. Ra improves the Pharaoh's ability to empower things, and also allows them to use the priest to empower. Okay. So I made a mistake earlier, that's why the priest empower, I thought they could normally. And as you can see, he makes some of his stuff cheaper and stronger. God powers wise, it starts off with rain, which allows your farmers to work faster, although that's unusual because farms aren't something you usually start with unlocked. So I guess this is a power you're supposed to save for a bit longer. Eclipse, as I believe I showed earlier, makes your myth units faster and stronger for a bit, while Shifting Sands basically teleports a small bunch of units, which you can use to throw them around the map for whatever fun purposes you wish. The Citadel power turns a regular town centre into those big citadels we've been seeing earlier that are much tougher and stronger, while the Locust Swarm destroys fishing boats and farms very quickly, but is generally, I would advise, a very bad power. If you're picking this god, you're probably doing it for the units that come with him, because they are actually quite good. And at the far end, you get the Tornado, which you've seen, throws things around, picks up buildings, units and things. And the Son of Osiris, which turns your Pharaoh into a very strong unit with chain lightning bolts. I can very much recommend this one, a lot of fun. Isis, meanwhile, starts with Prosperity, a power that makes gold be gathered faster and affects the whole map. And then can upgrade to things like the Plague of Serpents, which literally summons a swarm of snakes to defend an area. Ancestors, which causes basically a small army to spring up out of the ground for a short time. And the last unique power for him, which is Meteor, which is exactly what it sounds like. It bombards a load of rocks down from space. It's generally effective against a lot of things, but it's a little inaccurate. Set, meanwhile, starts with Vision, a very powerful god power if used correctly because it reveals the map. And I don't believe it stops you using another god power in that area. Next we get on to the faction that I probably know, maybe not the least, but the second least about. The Norse. The Norse have a few interesting things, including, for example, that their basic villager is also a light warrior. Additionally, they also have more than one type of villager. They also have gatherers that can do various things but can't build. The ox cart, which is a mobile drop-off point instead of the normally static buildings that you would place. And the dwarves, which are specific gold mining units. Especially when combined up with the special power Dwarven Gold Mine, they can very quickly mine this stuff. And the villagers can also be upgraded to these infantry units. Favour, unlike the other factions, they actually gain... Let's see if I can find something good to show it off with here. The combat. Although I believe the bigger the fight, the much faster you gain it, and I believe they also do gain it a little bit faster with the others because they've got to be able to keep up with the losses. This is unsurprisingly going to inspire. Look at him go. He's doing really bad, considering how many times he's hit that deer at this point. Of course, as with all the other factions, the gods get their own powers. Thor starts with the Dwarven Mine, which is a gold mine that the later in the game you use it, the more times you've aged up, the more gold it stores, and dwarves can mine it very quickly. Then, on the first tier, you get both the Healing Spring, which is a very strong power. It summons essentially a building that will heal every friendly nearby, and cannot be destroyed but can be captured. The Forest Fire, meanwhile, will literally set fire to that set of trees, and it spreads, destroying nearby units of buildings, in essence. Flaming weapons is a bit like bronze, but rather than increasing your unit's defensive strength, it makes them hit harder. Frost, meanwhile, literally just ices over a small area. It makes the units very hard to kill, but basically renders them, well, inactive. Ragnarok is actually quite an interesting ability in that, as it says, it turns all of your regular gathering units into, well, hero units. And the other alternative is Fimbulwinter, I believe that's how it's pronounced anyway, which summons essentially a small group of wolves to attack all the town centres. Oh, 4 town centres even. That's unusual, maybe that's changed. Odin gets the Great Hunt that we saw earlier that duplicates animals, and also gets a power called Undermine, which is a power with a very short range, but will basically instantly destroy, well, the things it mentions there, towers, fortresses and walls, which are usually very strong defensive buildings. Walking Woods makes a load of trees get up and start smacking things. And apparently the rest of his powers are not unique. And lastly, we've got Loki. Loki's spy ability basically marks a unit with an eye that will show you what it sees. And I don't believe, that, as it says it secretly, that the players can see that. So it can be useful for dropping a god power in the middle of their force later in the game. He also has one of my favourite powers in the whole game, Nidhogg. Which, it summons a dragon. I don't need to explain much more. It summons a dragon. It's really powerful. It's cool. I also just realised that I forgot to mention the faction bonuses for the last two, so I'll just quickly go over those. Ra gets better chariots and camels with the empowerment. I think I already said Isis gets increased population and the monument shield from god powers. And Set is the one that can have their priest train animals and also convert wild animals while getting cheaper strongholds. Thor, meanwhile, gets the improved, I believe, Dwarven Armory, which has some, as it says, cheaper upgrades and can be built straight away, and starts with 2 dwarves rather than gatherers, which they normally get. And also, as it says, they can gather food. These dwarves are cheaper and can gather food and wood better than normal dwarves, although I think they're still worse than gatherers. They're just not as bad. Odin's soldiers regenerate, which I was not aware of, and that is a very strong ability. And his raven, he gets 2 ravens, the 2 that he normally carries with him in the myths, which respawn and can be used for scout. And lastly, Loki has summoning myth units. I'm sorry, I've literally never seen this in practice. I've never seen him use that ability. I will say this much: it might even be new to the update, but that is cool. Myth units cost less favor. That makes them cheaper, which means he has to do less fighting. That makes sense for Loki, actually. And his Longhouse units train faster, so he can put an army together quickly. Atlantis was the first of the 2 expansion factions the game got, and I believe I'd describe them as a bit quality over quantity. They tend to have less units, but they tend to be a bit more impressive. The same goes to their buildings too. For example, notice I've only started with 1 guy. While I got 4 scouts, I've only started with 1 villager. But this villager, well, the citizen in this case, is quite a lot stronger. He costs more, but he can do a lot more for himself, and he acts as a mobile drop-off point. This little donkey, he doesn't need to take them anywhere. Another example is their buildings. Rather than the normal houses, they get manors, which hold twice as much, but you can only build 5 of them. And as another example, their normal drop-off buildings are replaced with an economic guild, which just does the upgrades instead. Even their standard villages can actually be upgraded into hero units that can be used to fight. And not too much of a cost, really, either. Their favour simply comes in as a trickle over time, which is less good, so you've got to be a little bit careful with it. The other addition is that Atlantis is a little bit vague in terms of its units. One of their gods, for example, I remember is Io, but Io isn't even technically... Well, he's a real god, but he's a Greek god. Now, I believe in universe this might be because I think Atlantis is initially represented by the Greek anyway in the original game, because I believe you start there in the campaign, which might be why. And again, their units are a little vague. They get some units like Dryads, which are kind of Celtic more than Atlantean, I would have said, and also, for example, mechanical soldiers, the automatons that can actually self-rebuild themselves once they're knocked out. They also have one other feature, which is maybe a little bit overpowered. I'm not entirely sure on this, but I believe it's the case. It's being overpowered, that is. But one thing I am certain of is their god powers could be used more than once. So, for example, you see above the deconstruct power here, it's got the 2 little lights. I can use this power more than once, and after a short while, it will cool down. Which is pretty cool. It's unique. I don't believe any of the other factions, apart from maybe the Chinese faction, get that. It does mean that sometimes their early powers are a little bit weaker than some of their later ones. But obviously more than one use is still very useful. Now I believe I had written down before I actually loaded the game up and started this recording that the way it worked was that your tier 1 powers had 4 uses, then 3 for the tier 2, etc. But apparently this is not the case, so I'm not entirely sure what's going on there anymore. Goodbye, building. I'm going to take you apart. So, the Atlantean gods. Kronos has a rather unique ability called Time Shift. Time Shift basically deconstructs your buildings and reconstructs them somewhere else for a fairly cheap wood cost, I think. Which allows you to move your towns, although I don't believe you can shift more than one building at once. I could be wrong on that. And apparently its siege and myth units move a bit faster and cost a little less. These powers include Deconstruct that we just saw. It literally takes apart a building, although the player does get a refund for it. Valor turns some of your human units into heroes, because more than just the Atlantean villagers can do that. I believe quite a few of the units can do that. So that can save you the cost of that, but isn't technically required, whereas the Spider Lair creates a little underground spider nest that will, if the eggs are left long enough to hatch fully, they'll burrow into the ground and then dive up to attack units that cross over them. Meanwhile, in the Heroic Age, you can get Hyperion, who'll grant you the Chaos God power, which makes a group of units just hostile to everybody, or the Trader power that just straight up steals a unit, and can allow you to have units you're not supposed to have. And on the other side of things, we also have the Vortex power, which just literally teleports your entire army to a spot. And the power that makes that completely obsolete, Implode, which is probably the strongest destructive god power in the game. Basically sucks everything in for a bit and then lets off an enormous explosion, and visually it's by far my favourite power. Uranus, meanwhile, gets to build effectively his own underworld gates. He has to build them rather than summoning them, which makes him a tiny bit worse. Sky passages they are called, but they are not hugely expensive, so it is a very useful little ability. For his powers, you get Shockwave, which basically blamps a small group with a blast, throws them around and stuns them. Could be good for breaking up formations. The Carnivore summons a plant that can be summoned on land or water, and will just try and eat whatever gets near it. Hesperides creates a tree that can train dryads, cannot be destroyed, but can be captured like the Healing Spring. Dryads being a fairly tough little myth unit, effectively giving them an extra one, despite the fact it only seems to train one. And the Tatarian Gate is another very fun god power that basically just unleashes a bunch of Hellspawn infinitely until the gate is destroyed. It's a lot of fun, that one. Could just create a bit of chaos. Gaia, meanwhile, gets the Gaia's Forest god power, as I believe, her only unique one, which creates a little forest. You can create more than one. And the forests are made of trees that grant more wood more quickly than normal trees do when they're lumberjacked. China, meanwhile, is also here. Despite being so surprised that they were going to get, like the game in general was going to get another expansion, and being quite excited for it and picking it up pretty much straight away, China left surprisingly little impact on me. I don't know if this is because I was just older, but I only really remember two things about them, and I did give them a go when the update came out, but like, the two things I remember are this. First of all, is the garden. The garden's their unique main thing. I don't know whether it's maybe a bit overpowered in the long run, because the longer the game goes on, the more useful this would be. They're basically the equivalent of the Greeks' Vault of the Gods god power, which I mentioned earlier, which is a max tier god power. They're not cheap. The way that the gardens work is that you select, as you can see here, what resource you want them to make, and they will provide a steady trickle of it. And the more of them you build, the faster that trickle goes. You can only have one resource active at a time, and they will all provide to that one. You have to basically pick and choose what you want them to be making for you. The only other real thing I remember from the Chinese faction was the Earth Dragon, a maximum tier god power that summons a regenerating dragon unit that reminds me a bit of the Nidhogg. He's pretty cool, from what I remember. And I also remembered by looking at this, they also have a unit called the Immortal, which is a generic trainable hero, which is not very common among the other factions, so that's pretty nice, especially considering it's available right away. But yes, the Chinese faction, while interesting in theory, they've got some unusual god powers, like this one just summons goats. No, 3 goats is not many, even though you can fatten up animals that are living at the town centre. Pro tip, by the way. If you leave herd animals at your town centre, they'll gradually get fatter over time, provide more food. But yes, they're a little bit of a strange faction, but we'll go over their various abilities and things nevertheless. So, here we go with the mispronunciations again. Bushui, I don't know quite how you're supposed to pronounce it, can use Blessed Construction to speed up building construction. I don't remember seeing an option for that when I was building in that little test, but all 8 immortals can be trained right from the okay gauge. Okay, so they get up to 8 immortals and they can be trained straight away, so that's his bonus. Cool. God power wise, he gets the goat ability. Okay, so like Dwarven Forge, that's Dwarven Mine, that's why I was thinking it wasn't any, and the later you wait, the more you get. Call to Arms effectively duplicates a handful of human units, while Great Journey just makes all your units faster for a bit. I'm not sure how useful I'd consider that, although... Wait, they get Sung Wukong? Okay, that might be worth it. Sung Wukong is pretty busted if you know anything about mythology. Imperial Examination makes you build its units, train, and build faster. That's alright, but I can't imagine that being great. Uproot spawns living roots. I believe they act as a bit of a wall and also do some damage and retaliation. Great Flood makes a little tsunami. Pretty good. While Inferno starts a firestorm. These I could both imagine being good, but it says a lot that I don't remember ever playing far enough to actually see them. Meanwhile, Noir? I don't know. Gardens gather favour faster and grow one population. That does sound good. Human units are cheaper. Yep, this is sounding all pretty good, actually. Sounds like she would be probably fairly strong. I think I even heard that the Chinese might have been a bit too strong, at least. I don't know if they've been rebalanced since. Barrage calls down a bunch of arrows and does damage on an area. Geyser, I believe, is a combination of a bit of damage on an area and knockback. And there's the Earth Dragon mentioned before. And Shenong. Allows your monks to convert myth units. So you can steal people's myth units. Oh god, it's Age of Empires all over again. I think that's the one where people used to use the capture units a lot. And gains most of the same powers. In fact, they are all the same powers. So, I've said all this about the factions. What's the gameplay like? Well, as you've probably been seeing from my various bits of background footage and things, you basically command an army of little dudes, I would call them. Villagers, or whatever your faction's equivalent are. You usually tend to build new buildings and gather resources from the map. Like, for example, tell them to go that deer, or gather berries from that bush, food. They can mine gold mines for, well, gold, unsurprisingly, and chop down trees for wood, or in this case, bamboo. And favour, I've of course already explained with the factions, which is used specifically for myth units. Use these resources to either make more buildings, such as, for example, once you can afford it, that temple. For the moment, I will build storage right there and start mining some gold. Research improvements, such as, for example, whatever this is, acupuncture. So that would be a faction-specific upgrade, because it needs mana? Mana, what am I saying? Needs favour. Which apparently gives villagers health regen. That actually sounds pretty good, because villagers do often tend to get picked on a bit. Yes, you can use it to research units, or you could also tier up. Tiering up requires a certain building constructed to do so. In the case of tier 1, it's always a temple. And grants you access to new abilities and such. In fact, I'll show you in a moment. Should mention while I'm thinking about it, actually, and these little guys are doing their thing, gathering away. One of the things I haven't mentioned so far in this game is the control. It's basically you use the mouse for the most part. The main reason I'm not mentioning the controls, really, is because I don't find anything wrong with them. They're standard RTS controls, basically, and they work. As a general rule with my reviews, if there's something with the controls I specifically want to mention, I will. If I don't, that probably means that they're just alright, they work. So, once you have the prerequisite building, in this case the temple that my little fellows have constructed over here, I should also mention that the more... It might be obvious to people who've played RTS games, but the more people you assign on the task, the quicker they'll do it. Once you have the correct buildings and the right amount of resources, you can tier up to go up in age. Pick one of the 2 minor gods, which grants you all the various things that come with them. So, for example, I could have the little Quillin, I think like a sort of fox dog thing. And so the various upgrades like Elixir of Immortality and things, which no, doesn't make them immortal, but it does give you regeneration. Or I could have, say, Terracotta Soldiers that turn into dust when destroyed and upgrades to farms. In this case, I think I'll take you. You begin to worship them, which is basically upgrading. Once that bar fills up, you'll gain a tier up, which will change the... Well, I call it a tier up, I think it's an age up, technically. It'll change the visual appearance of your, area in general. And it'll grant access to new units, and it'll unlock the god power that you've researched. This is, I believe, one of the new maps. I should also just quickly talk about while I've been looking at this, for those that have played it before. I think it must have come with the Chinese faction expansion. It's actually quite interesting. I'm actually kind of sad I've never seen this one before. Oh dear. My scout appears to have found another one and decided he doesn't like it. This is actually quite an interesting map, and it seems to come with some farms already on it. And the rain god power gets cast occasionally. So while I don't remember too much the Chinese update, it seemed clear that it actually came with some interesting ideas. The rain god power increases food output on your farm specifically, so it's actually quite a unique map, and I'm guessing more food-related things would excel here. And there we go, with the rank up, advance to classical age. When you rank up, you get a free myth unit. In fact, now that I've ranked up and can actually get a few more of the buildings, I'll talk about the myth units a little. Well, not the myth units. Well, we'll talk about the myth units, but I'll talk about the different unit types briefly. So, the first of the main unit types. The most basic type of troop in this game is the infantryman. They're cheap, they're disposable, effectively. Not very good, but they're reasonably effective against most things. The easiest target for them, I would probably say, is archers, if they can get to them. Each faction has its own type, but they're broadly the same. They might just be more effective against one thing than another, for example. Then, to go next to them is the second most major type, the archer. Like, for example, this Chukoni? It's crossbowman. It's crossbowman. You get the idea. Although if you do want a little more info about each unit, you can press the little arrow button and see what it is. Oh, for example, this is a repeating crossbow, apparently. Very impressive. These infantrymen could be improved by upgrades, such as the upgrades from the main upgrade building for your humans, which is the armory. These upgrades are actually visual. Once you finish researching them, like this copper shield, they'll actually appear on the character and they'll change the look. And I really appreciate that in games that do that. It's a lot of extra work sometimes, or at least it's a fair bit of extra work for quite a small feature, but it adds up to me. I don't know whether these guys carry shields, but hopefully we'll see he gets one in a minute. Oh, the archer appears to have found something to take a look at. The AI in this game is reasonably bright, I should add. It's not the most stellar in the world, but it's usually pretty alright. No, that one did not, but I believe that one will. Right, in a brief moment, hopefully, we should see his jacket change to reflect his upgraded armor. I am apparently talking out of my rear end. I am sure that is a thing. It might just be that the Chinese factions don't show it so well. We might as well go on to myth units, seeing as the Quillen has shown up to beat the living daylights out of that guy. Myth units are kind of one of your generally stronger units. They're expensive, usually. They take a lot more resources than foot soldiers, and they cost favour as well. But they usually are generally quite strong, and often have unique abilities that other units do not. In the case of Quillen, he is apparently immune to most powers. To counter myth units, you need heroes. These are usually the main characters for the campaigns, but there's often semi-generic ones as well. You can usually only build one of each named hero, and they are effectively anti-myth units. They do increased damage against them, they're resilient, and most of the main ones, when killed, will regenerate after a short period of time. They'll get back up again, basically. You have to have a unit within line of sight range to do this, though, and there's a bit of a delay, so you've got to be a little bit careful with it. The enemy apparently decided to start a fight with me, so I think I'll show up another god path. There we go. Which apparently actually went off exactly as one of my opponents used the ceasefire god power, which meant that they really couldn't do anything during that. I've never seen that happen before. However, we're also ready for the next unit type to show off. Cavalry. Cavalry are, well, horsemen, usually, I think. Maybe the Egyptians have some camel riders as well. Effectively, they're bigger, bulkier, more expensive infantry that are usually faster. Their basic main role is counter archers. They're able to quickly get to the back line and attack archers that would otherwise be too evasive for infantry to catch up with. Alright, I also believe I have remembered why the visual upgrades on the weapons are not working. Or on the troops, I should say. The main appearance of the troops is caused by their specific upgrade. For example, this medium War Academy soldiers upgrade. That will change the visual on them. And the one that will change the visual on their weapons is the weapons upgrade from the armory. I believe this is the case. I will do one of these updates and get back to you in a moment. Right, moment of truth. Does he change appearance? Yeah, there we go. I knew it was a thing. I wasn't... Let's say I wasn't crazy. Maybe I'm crazy. Also, we're ready to age up again, so let's take a look at another power that I haven't seen before. And again, as before, each time you age up, you have to wait a short time. I'm also doing really badly. I hope I don't actually lose this fight because I haven't been training units. But we'll see how this goes. Again, this is more to show things off to all you folks, versus anything else. You might have noticed by now that my review style is a tiny bit like... It's almost more showing off what the game has than reviewing it in some ways. I kind of like to be fairly in-depth when I talk about stuff like this and be like, oh, you know, here's all the things you can do in it kind of thing. Oh boy. Oh, here we go. Here's that Egyptian priest there that can summon animals. I like this matchup. There's a lot of giraffes. Oh, and there's one of their myth units, the Scorpion Man. This may be a problem. You know, I mentioned a second ago how we might be a little bit in trouble. This might be that trouble. Oh, the big building. Oh, there we go. We'll tear it up. Good news is, when you tear up, you get a free mission unit. Go, salamander. Protect my base. So let's try out this geyser. Oh, that's a lot more of those than I thought it would be. I think I might have just taken out my own building, but that is an interesting looking power. I hadn't seen that one before. Oh, they've cast one of their own. They've cast the ancestors power. They've got undead ones around there. Oh my word. That's good. Salamander can win that fight. He's basically my army at this point. Good news is, Salamander won it and their power wore off. Do I... I'm interested to know whether these guys will stick around indefinitely. Do they go off when units walk onto them? Is that how it works? No. Because they specifically have this back. Yes, so keeping an eye on your defense in this game could also be quite important, so I just discovered, because a wave of Egyptian slingers have just shown up. I've just done an upgrade as an example on the watchtowers to allow them to shoot arrows. Some of the upgrades are quite interesting in that they actually specifically change the function of your various buildings and things. So this is the most drastic, but again it changes the visuals. Now that they can shoot, they've got a different look to them. And I'm building some cavalry to quickly counter these archers. One other thing to quickly note though is that your villagers are not completely helpless in a fight. I mentioned earlier they get picked on a bit, but I can sometimes underestimate them a little bit. Well, apparently I can't catch a break today, so I figure it might be a good moment to show off. I'm going to pause quickly. One of the game's other units that might be a little bit more infamous, and they're certainly some of my favourite, the cheat units. Should help if I could spell them wrong. Spell them right. There we go. Here's Laser Bear. He's a supersonic bear that shoots lasers from his eyes and has a horde of friendly monkeys and regenerates health. Look at him go. The attack animation doesn't even look like it's working right. Yeah, so the gamers, as you said earlier, sort of stuff have shown off a lot of cheat codes, and some of them are interesting. The other main one I remember is I'll just look at this thing. This game came out in 2003. It might even be pre-Nyan Cat. But they got this thing in the game. He spits hearts, by the way, if you actually get him into a fight fast enough to attack. Yeah, so there's a few units you can only get by cheating. I believe there's also a giant man with a fork, but I never knew that cheat code as a kid. Oh, there he goes. The AI is really planning to win today. But yes, I believe these units are here for testing purposes, basically. Strange enough, they didn't make them indestructible. I don't know why that's because they wanted to test like really high regen for something, maybe. But yeah, the cheat units can actually die if you're not careful. The Hippo's actually taking damage. Like, don't get me wrong, they're very strong, but yeah, they can actually be killed. They can also be used to very easily cheese the campaign if you need to. Now I was waiting there to be able to build some siege equipment to show off for you as the sort of second to last main unit type, but the AI has actually beaten me to it. Siege units like these Triple I? No, they're just straight up siege towers. Are specifically anti-building units. They don't tend to be actually for things like crossing walls, it's more just cracking a hole straight through them. They're a bit slow usually, and they vary a lot between units. I believe the Norse just get like a battering ram. I think the Chinese actually get rocket launchers, or like primitive ones at least. Yeah, there's a lot of different siege units as well. There's one more unit type that I'm leaving till last. I'll be able to show that off very shortly, but I also wanted to quickly take a quick look at one of the new powers, because why not? We're learning so much new stuff today. Let's try out an Inferno, which I can't use because they've got a lure down, and I think also because there's a rainstorm. I'll be able to get this out though. Ooh, that I like. That's the power I'm not saying yet. Yeah, another generic-ish destruction power, that's interesting. Banner buildings and scorch any units demonstrators. Not selected that. Burns your own stuff too. was not remembering wrong. They do have rocket launchers. I have nothing more to say here. It's just this is a game set in, you know, literally mythical times, and the Chinese get rocket launchers. No bias here at all, I'm sure. But what I do have a little more to talk about, I should say, is the Titan Gate. There's kind of two main, aside from, well, destroying the enemy's base and leaving nothing behind is effectively the win condition, but there's two, I would argue, like, most effective ways to achieve it, and I'm not a competitive player, so take this with a grain of salt. First way is to build a wonder and protect it for long enough, because if you build a wonder for, I believe, and keep it in one piece for, I believe, 10 minutes, you automatically win. Wonders, as you can see, are quite expensive. There's a slightly cheaper alternative, even though it takes a little more work, maybe, and it's a lot more impressive. A Titan Gate. Titan Gate's an expensive bit of research that you unlock after, well, effectively tearing up for the 5th time. That will unlock you with use the pad to place Titan Gate. Once it's placed on the map, as you can see by the little yellow circle, everyone knows where it is. Villagers then have to uncover it, and you can call all your villagers to it. That button. Yes, literally, it's so important that they gave you a button to just tell everyone, stop what you're doing, come help. Once a Titan Gate is uncovered, assuming you can protect it for long enough, because it can be destroyed, and if it's destroyed, you will lose it. It costs you a lot of money, so you've got to be a little bit careful there. Once it's completed, your Titan will be summoned. Each faction has their own Titan. You'll see this one in a minute. I don't think I've seen this one. My favourite being the Egyptian one. He's like a big old bird, and he, instead of coming out of the ground, he like descends from the heavens with flaming wings. It's cool. I like him. Titans themselves are very, very powerful units. There's no real units that could really take one on alone. I think the Norse Nidhogg Myths unit is probably the closest thing. So you need to fight them with a considerable amount of force and retaliation. The Titans themselves aren't like instant death to everything immediately, but they will do significant damage and can squash buildings very quickly. And it takes a lot to destroy them. So you've got to be a little bit careful if your enemy gets one out. In fact, as you can see, I think the enemy is specifically sending in their units now because they're worried about one. Should probably destroy a Phoenix egg before that gets back up again. Ah, the Titan Gate is nearly ready. I should mention that the Titans were not in the game in the base version. They were added obviously in the Titans expansion, and they're named after. I would have said this point was a big Japanese one. If anything, he looks a bit Oni-ish, but maybe he's based on some kind of Chinese giant of some sort. Anyway, once you've got to tighten up, the game's probably over. Assuming you've got a reasonable amount of troops to send him in with, a Titan could fairly handily floor an enemy base pretty much on his own. They'll happily stand through units, scattering entire crowds with some of their bigger attacks. They're a lot of fun. So, as he makes his way over there, how about the game's campaigns? Well, there's quite a few. The game came with one by default, but there's a few extra. There was, I believe, one which I think is called the Golden Boar, which was made by the developers effectively at some point and just released as a free edition online, actually. Before that was really all that common. This was well before like the Steam version and workshop support and everything. It's a smaller campaign than the main one. Then the Titans campaign added another with the update, which is focused on the Atlantean stuff. And the Chinese update also, or Chinese expansion also added its own campaign. But I have to admit, I haven't been very keen on it. I played a little bit, and if I remember correctly, it was very difficult and not necessarily actually that fun. Oh, as you're probably seeing now, the your line of sight doesn't update until you see it again. Additionally, these little yellow boxes, which is something I haven't mentioned, but you might have seen the messages popping up. They're these little like red boxes that are scattered around the map that heroes can pick up. Once they pick one up, hey, there it goes. Once you pick one of those up, you can't attack with that hero. If it brings it back to one of your temples, you'll get your own bonus. It says, this is a mansion. It's a house outpost. Just kill animals in a single shot, that kind of thing. I believe some of them set stuff on fire, for example. So, we'll go take a proper look at those campaigns. Alright, since these reviews are intended to be something I can feasibly make and edit and everything in one day, I'm not going to go too into deep depth with these campaigns or try and like get too much footage from them. But I'll go over a little bit about them quickly and what I remember about them. Fall of the Trident is the game's standard campaign. It's basically about a man called Arkantos, a hero from Atlantis, starting off dealing with some pirates, but ending up having to go all around the world and try and thwart his Cyclops nemesis. It moves between the three factions, allowing you to play with all of them. It's pretty enjoyable. There's a lot of various objectives and things to do. Golden Gift is the campaign that was effectively made by the devs and added as a little freebie. And it features, I believe it's, if I remember correctly, a tale of two dwarves. I think it might be, effectively, it's brought up in the main campaign, but I believe it might even be the story of the two that make a sort of golden boar, if I remember correctly, a giant one. Tale of the Dragon is the Chinese campaign, and again, I remember this being very difficult, and with no real knowledge of Chinese mythology, I have to admit I didn't think much of this one. It just generally wasn't very impressive, I'm afraid. However, the New Atlantis was very good. It has, while I haven't played it at all on this save, on Steam, it's a very visually impressive campaign. They do a lot of cool effects and things, and it's kind of about the Atlanteans trying to build a new Atlantis, effectively. And I believe that's, well, effectively all, apart from... Oh, there is one last thing, which we will take a quick look at. The last major part of this game left to mention, and you could probably maybe take a rough guess looking at it, is the level editor. I actually think these tools might just straight up be the dev kit that the developers use to make the game. Because you can place everything. Bits of terrain, like scenery, objects that should just be for cutscenes, things you're not supposed to have access to, like the... Well, these are bits of the taproot for one of the levels. It gives you access to everything, and I think it's not even that difficult to add your own stuff, although I haven't tried myself. Well, a bird here is being a little spooky. And this can be combined with the campaign editor. You can make your own just straight up full campaigns, and some people have. I've tried one of the ones off the workshop. It was interesting. I couldn't do it, but it was interesting. So yeah, there's basically infinite content. The Steam Workshop's integrated with it, so you can just download people's levels, and there's also some mods out there. I think most of them are text replacements, but they are there. So yes, while Age of Mythology might be a slightly dated RTS, it still runs reasonably well. The remake's available on Steam, so yeah, go play it. And while that's technically the end of the review part, there's a little bit more I've got to say still. I said it before and I'll say it again, YouTube is merciless to creators that don't get engagement on their videos, so feel free to leave likes and comments if you're feeling kind. And if you can't afford Age of Mythology, or you're just feeling generous, you can check out my own game, IORC. I made it from scratch, just me. It's a game about being the fire service equivalent for Space Debris, 2D action game. You'll probably like it. I know I said I was probably going to review Stormworks this week, but upon remembering that the Weapons DLC is actually releasing pretty soon, it might be within a couple of weeks, if anything, maybe a little longer, I decided to delay that review until it's come out, and I've given that a bit of a try. I'm not exactly sure what I'll review next week, though I have no idea down with my list of games, so there'll definitely be something. But if you want to see what it is, or maybe even leave some suggestions, again, for suggestions, comment, but if you want to see what the next one is, make sure to subscribe and hit that bell so you don't miss it, and I'll see you all next time.